Pig girls, plastic surgery programs, interspecies.
Whoa. We've done this already, Todd.
Nope. This time it's Batman and Robin. Welcome to Panelism, a podcast where we talk about the comics and graphic novels worth having on your shelf. I'm Todd A.
I'm Taylor Trask. Hey, Todd.
Hello, Taylor. Wow, it's great to talk to you again.
Yeah, for those of you listening, we record these back-to-back usually, so you'll have listened to last week's episode, which we just recorded, and now it's this week's episode. So but Todd and I are still at
We haven't done this for several weeks. We've been doing like one-shot episodes, so
that's right.
I think that's what got in my head there was like, oh, wow, we just finished an episode. Now we're going to do a pick that I'm bringing to the table. But I knew it, but we had, and we're... We had a couple of shout outs to do. I really didn't want to use the term shout outs.
I know.
I apologize for that. I just had a total brain blank.
Well, I wrote shout outs in the show notes. So
that's why I was thinking it.
Yeah,
oh, gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
We've been getting a lot of great feedback and comments on Instagram. So we're going to start doing little shout outs to creators and hopefully get them on as guests and get their books talked about too. But right out of the gate, Anthony, who is at Worlds Within Worlds on Instagram, that's worlds_within_worlds. He asked if we are aware of artist Bill Sink. Why I cannot pronounce that dude's name. I would say it's, oh my God, I had it in my head. Sinkowitz. And specifically the miniseries Legion, both the comic and the TV show. Anthony wants to know if we are familiar with it. He's going back through our old episodes and was just curious. So I figured we'd talk about that real quick.
I am not familiar with Legion, but I am familiar with Sinkowitz.
Jesus.
Because he illustrated the New Mutants back in the 80s when I read the New Mutants. And, Rom. I mean, who can forget Rom? That was
that's right. That's right.
But yeah, I had to look him up because the name looked familiar and I didn't know what title I'd seen his name on. And I'm assuming it was New Mutants, but Legion, no, I'm not aware of.
You're not familiar with the TV show even?
Oh, is it the same thing?
Yeah, same thing. The comic came first and then the TV show was based on that.
Yeah, I know that. Yeah, April from Parks and Rec is in it.
Exactly. And I'm also familiar with the TV show. It's kind of like Umbrella Academy, where I knew a comic existed, but I could not tell you the first thing about it. And
I didn't even know there was a comic. Oh
yeah. The TV show is much more familiar. So I'm like Umbrella Academy. I'm going to have to go back and take in the comic at some point. It's going to be very difficult because when these shows come out and they dramatize these stories in very specific ways, or you have an actor portray a character, it's very hard to divorce yourself of that when you go back and then read it. Of course,
yeah.
It's very, very, very tricky. So, and vice versa. A lot of people will say, well, I had the idea of this character in my mind when I read it, and now this doesn't quite work. So it's always interesting to do that. I think in the case of the Umbrella Academy, it's going to be very difficult. Legion, I'm not as married to the show. I mean, it's a great show. I just haven't. I'm not sort of. I think I can separate them in my mind and treat them as separate pieces.
Well, that's interesting about Umbrella Academy, which I have not watched yet, but the first volume is available on Comixology Unlimited, so yep. I have it on my tablet ready to read. And in fact, thought I might prepare it for today's episode, but have not done that. But yeah, my intention was read the first volume, then jump into the show and compare from that angle.
I've got some inside baseball, by the way, for you on that too. Diamond, which is the main comics distributor for most comic shops, although not for Barnes & Noble, which is a different distributor, by the way. But Diamond has kind of dropped the ball on Umbrella Academy. So there's a lot of comic shops that are out of that book across the country. I kind of learned that at our last book club meeting at a local comic shop here. They're kind of moaning about the fact that Diamond's dropping the ball on these things, and even Captain Marvel too. It seems like there's not as much Captain Marvel stuff as there could be with that movie coming out. So
interesting. Yeah, this issue of previews is all about Captain Marvel.
Yeah.
The comic book shops are doing nothing but prep you for Captain Marvel.
Man. It's like, here it comes. It's like, I remember when Deadpool 1 came out, that was just like Deadpool was half the store.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, oh, literally. Okay. One other thing I want to mention real quick, somebody on Instagram sent us a link to Rising Sun Comics, which is a great little indie publisher. So check them out, risingsuncomics.com. None of this is paid for. This is just cool people on Instagram giving us little shout outs. If you're a creator or a publisher or illustrator, and you want us to check out your stuff or maybe featured on the show, find us on Instagram, send us a private message, or email us info@panelism.inc. That's panelism.ink. So that should
and maybe we'll re-shout you on the show. That's what we're going to call it from now on.
Yeah.
I'm so proud of us both because we have both or each nuked our Twitters. So we can't retweet you. Our tweeters exist, but I use tweet delete to wipe mine out. I don't know what you did.
I use something like that because I realized Twitter does not have that functionality baked in, which is
what
funny. By the way, we should clarify, neither of us did this for any sort of embarrassment or of any kind. Like neither of us are embroiled in some kind of sexual scandal and we had to delete all our stuff.
Think of that until you said it, and now I'm wondering what dark past you're trying to hide from us.
Yeah, or vice versa.
Taylor was just fired from a movie.
Yeah, exactly. I was a stand-up comic and said some things. No, it's one of those things. I'm really focusing most of my attention on Instagram, Pinterest to some degree, and then LinkedIn for my business stuff. So I just over time, Facebook and Twitter just aren't as valuable or useful to me as they once were. So it's simple as that.
Well, I don't know that I can come up with a better transition, but that feeds into the theme.
There's no good transition for that.
There's just a hard left turn. But that feeds into the themes of the book that I'm bringing today, which of course you have at this point heard in our little pre-show intro and gotten some hint of it. But I wanted to talk about a pretty old book that I went back to just to kind of refamiliarize myself with it, and had a lot of thoughts and thought, well, I'll just talk about this in the show. And that is Batman and Robin, Batman Reborn. It was written by Grant Morrison. It was illustrated by Frank Quitely. It's DC, obviously. It was released in 2010. The stories appeared in 2009. I'm a bit confused because Grant Morrison says in the epilogue, like in the sort of DVD extras of the collected volume, that these stories they'd been working on these stories. I don't know if he meant we'd been working on the story since 2006, or if he meant all the Batman stories from 2006 forward fed into the theme of this. And even though I looked at this epilogue today to remind myself of these things, I also don't remember what reboot this was a part of, if it was New 52 or it must have been New 52 or Rebirth. I don't know, whatever. They were rebooting at the time. Let me give you that back cover, since it is a Batman and Robin book. And then I'll try to explain it. The Dark Knight has fallen, sacrificing himself in the final crisis to defeat the ultimate evil. Tim Drake has laid down the mantle of Robin to search the world for a sign that his mentor can be brought back from oblivion. Now there's a new dynamic duo in town. Dick Grayson, the original Robin, has taken up the cape and cowl of his former partner, and Damian Wayne, the assassin-raised son of Bruce Wayne, has become a deadly new Robin, ready to fight crime by any means necessary. Together, this masked odd couple must stop a rising tide of villainy whose savagery and brutality are unlike anything Gotham City has ever seen. They must also overcome a lethal pair of rival vigilantes with ties to their own tragic past and stay away from each other's throats long enough to succeed. So if you don't know what's going on, and this is why I think Morrison may have been talking about like the not these stories in particular starting in 2006, but sort of the run of Batman up to the rebirth of DC or whatever it was called, is that Bruce Wayne was dead at the time. Mm-hmm. And I believe he was traveling through time.
Something like that.
How they explained that. But anyway, so yeah, Dick Grayson is now Batman, and Damian Wayne, which is way too close to Damon Wayans.
Isn't it?
Name. Yeah. Because every time I try to say it without looking at it, that's what I want to say.
Yeah.
But anyway, so Damian is the new Robin. He is 10 years old. Mm-hmm. He is Bruce Wayne's son. His mother is Talia Al Ghul, right? Did I have that right?
Yep.
So Raish Al Ghul's daughters, and is Talia. So this is the grandson of Raish, as I've heard that.
Do you say Raish or do you say Raz? Because there's
I'm trying to be the ultra nerd, like
all right,
the pedant on the show. So I don't know. I say Raz, but
Raz is cooler. I have
some. That reminds me of Frasier. Anyway, go ahead.
Oh God, I have some interesting context on this actually. So,
oh boy.
Yeah. I'm so glad you picked this. Grant Morrison on an episode of Fat Man on Batman years ago, back when it was Kevin Smith interviewing just people, and Grant Morrison was on for a while. He had mentioned this was his absolute favorite version of Batman because it inverts the tradition of dark, grim Batman, lighthearted Robin. Now it's lighthearted Batman, dark, grim Robin. You know, it's like you got this little kid who's like fighting against the world, and then Dick Grayson, who's more like, it's all good. You know, he's not the dude, but it's much more the reverse of that dynamic. And Grant Morrison said he could have written this forever and ever. And like, this was his favorite version of Batman to write. So I'm fascinated you picked this for that reason. I've been wanting to get into this or get more insight into it since I heard that episode.
Well, this was actually a time in DC Comics that I really loved what DC was doing. And then I feel like they screwed it all up with Rebirth. And again, I don't have my dates right, so I could have these things totally backwards. But at this time, another dynamic duo that I really loved was Stephanie Brown was Batgirl, and Barbara Gordon as Oracle was basically her mentor. And I thought that was so perfect. And Stephanie Brown was much more of like, you know, it was much more of like that. I think she was in college. She wasn't a teenager, but it was definitely that it captured the spirit of like the original Batgirl, or what we want to imagine of, like, you know, the young woman who just, you know, is just, she's very earnest and wants to help out in the crime fighting. She doesn't have a big dark backstory, but now at this point in time, the original Batgirl, Barbara Gordon, has that dark backstory because she is paralyzed from the Joker, you know, shooting her. So it was like another sort of flip there, you know, instead of the grim Batman as the mentor to Batgirl. Anyway, you have the grim Oracle. So those two things were happening concurrently in the DC universe. And then I guess DC got sick of that and brought all the original people back, and you know, I can't really tune into it now. So
like we've discussed before, the best Batman books are Elseworlds books or self-contained universe books, meaning like the Dark Knight Returns is technically in canon, but it can very much be its own thing. Killing Joke is this weird, like it's its own thing, but it's also got the, you know, Barbara Gordon canon bit in it for some reason. Like,
well, so best Killing Joke has now been like retconned in, but Dark Knight Returns.
No, it hasn't. I believe that Batman kills the Joker at the end of Killing Joke, so it can't be retconned in because Batman would have been taken to prison.
No, but remember I mean, you don't remember this because you didn't read it, but I think I told you about this off air. In the Tom King stories before the wedding, Joker tells Catwoman that Batman just stood there and laughed with him. And that he didn't kill him.
Don't want to accept that version of events. The Killing Joke only works when Batman kills the Joker. Like, we can talk about this in another episode because let's be honest, the way Grant Morrison wrote it, not Grant Morrison, the way
Alan
Moore, Jesus, thank you. The way Alan Moore wrote it, it's supposed to be non-definitive. I mean, the whole point was that it's like, look, if I told you this, that would be lame. Like, it's for you to determine, and for my interpretation of events, based on all available evidence, Todd, is that he kills the Joker.
Well, and then if you want to bring the movie into it, it's after
Let's never bring the movie into this.
It's after Batman's affair with Batgirl.
Oh, Christ. The movie should never be referenced again. Oh,
my God.
Let's not go back there. We talked about the movie in an episode. I forget which number it is. If you're really curious about Todd and I's opinions on the movie, go back and find that and just forget it ever happened. But real quick, okay, going back to Batman and Robin, Batman Beyond, are we talking about volume 1 that has that kick-ass yellow cover?
Yes. So this is Batman Reborn, not Beyond.
I'm sorry.
And yeah, it's great that you bring up that quote from Fat Man on Batman because Also in the DVD extras here, Morrison talks about just how the color scheme was supposed to work, and drawing on that color scheme from the 60s Batman, and positioning like those really bright primary colors with the sort of grim dark stuff of of Gotham. And I think in that respect, I think Frank Quitely is such a perfect artist to do this, because he pulls it off in this way that doesn't, I mean, they're definitely like, he is grounded in a traditional comics sense. This is not, it's not like, there's, it's not, I don't know, deconstructing like what a comic is or anything like that. But Quitely just has this way of illustrating where all those colors like make sense, even compared to, oh my gosh, the name escapes me, but in White Knight, Sean, illustrator, in White Knight that we read last year,
John Murphy.
Murphy. Yeah. So, where that drew on a lot of the history of Batman, but it still stayed very much in that like grim dark kind of color scheme, and this one works with those bright primary colors so well. I mean, there's a villain introduced very like in the first page, who's called Mr. Toad, who like literally resembles a toad, and he has these bright orange eyes, and just the way that like his green skin and his orange eyes contrast off the like blue background and the dark car that they're driving in and stuff. It's just very cool. It's like arresting, right away you're kind of interested in it. Quitely, and I would say this is like a recommended if you like sort of thing. If you liked All-Star Superman, which is like sort of an alternate take on Superman, and I think, hopefully you can Google this while I ramble, I think that's Morrison also. Am I wrong about that? That might be Morrison and Quitely as well.
God.
But anyway,
you would have to ask me that, wouldn't you?
I know this one.
It is definitely Frank Quitely.
I know.
Grant Morrison and Grant. Yeah, it's the same team.
So this is kind of their, and to me, it's such a cool take on the Batman and Robin story, because at the time of All-Star Superman, or shortly after that, there was All-Star Batman and Robin by Frank Miller, which was not at all like All-Star Superman. Man. That's the one that you and I have mentioned on a couple of shows. I'll probably talk about it at length at some point. It's very interesting, but it's the one where he kills the Green Lantern at some point, and then they have to perform like an emergency tracheotomy, and it's just crazy. That's the one of the famous like "I'm the goddamn Batman" quote that you may have seen in memes and stuff. Anyway, so yeah, as you point out, this is great because Dick Grayson does not have that mean, the concise way of speaking that Bruce might have had when Bruce was so stern and very, kind of strict in his instruction to people. And Dick Grayson is definitely, there's even a conversation with Alfred where he's wondering like, how can I bring this kid in? They're sort of talking about like teaching styles in a brief way, now what is unintentionally or possibly intentionally hilarious about it is Damian is such an asshole. and he's supposed to be 10 years old, and he's like basically insufferable. I mean, I would never, if I were Batman, I would never take this kid out with me. Constantly ignoring Dick's commands, constantly going too far and being too violent with people.
Wow.
So he's, his excuse is like, I was raised by the League of Assassins or whatever, I can damage you in all these different ways. There's a great turning point in this where, Dick has to save Damian, and then there's this, like kind of quick one-liner where Damian's like, "Oh, did you just save my life?" And you can kind of feel the tone shift right there of, oh, that's what this is about. We're partners, this is anyway. But the story here, so in volume 1, I had read this as these issues were coming out. I'd read that whole like couple of arcs. I don't know how many issues it went until Batman was resurrected. And then kind of gave up on the Batman and Robin series once it was Bruce Wayne, because to me it was the interesting thing was that dynamic of Damian and Dick. But I'd never read it collected in a volume. And so there's almost, it feels like there's 2 arcs here, but they're related. I mean, they definitely like one leads into the other, but it's sort of, I mean, this is a terrible comparison, but it's sort of like that first season of Luke Cage, where I sort of wish the first 6 episodes and sort of the first arc of this, like I could have just stopped reading there and gone like, I love it. And the next arc, not that it was bad at all, it just wasn't as satisfying.
It's too jarring of a tonal shift. Well, it's like,
although you do have to hear that, like in the Batman and Robin, you do have to have the turning point of Damian figuring out that, you know, how he works with Dick. That's very important. Mm-hmm. It's just, the first one is such a great introduction. I think it's, you know, it's
where do pig people and all of that come into play? Because you tease this up pretty well.
Oh yeah, that's true.
We can't let that slide.
It was, you know, one of the things that's really difficult to balance, like as a you know, writer and artist, the creators of this book, is what a freaking horror show Gotham is. Mm-hmm. And the first story is absolute. I think that's where the distinction is. The first story in this is absolutely like a horror show. That is the theme of this. There is this villain named Pig, Pyg, who you assume is wearing sort of a pig mask. But he's turning people into living dolls. He calls them Dollatrons. Wow. But they look like sort of that old doll, the sort of Raggedy Ann, Raggedy Andy doll, where it's got like the stringy red hair and the moon-shaped face, you know, just like so. But he's taking like this false skin, or it's real skin, we don't know. It's some sort of face, and he's surgically attaching it to a person's face, so they are completely disfigured. And then they're also sort of mind controlled by him, or at least they just become these sort of violent zombies at that point. Mm-hmm. So it's super gross. Mm-hmm.
And real quick, because I'm assembling a list of comics and graphic novels for my friend's son, who's I think in 5th grade. Is this a kid appropriate book? Is that too disturbing?
I don't think so. I mean, I'm not not a parent, so I can't really say at this point. They've probably seen, you know, many more murders in Avengers movies and stuff like that. But it's, you know, it to me feels like a horror movie. Like it feels like the level of that. I actually think I think it's more disturbing than White Knight for sure.
Wow. Okay.
But it does have these, you know, overlaps there of like drug trade and stuff. And one of my segue to get us into talking about the book was the social media thing that we've been talking about. There's a theme of that, but when you think back to, this was 10 years ago when they wrote this, it is done in a very cool way where social media is present and like referenced, but it's not so overwhelmingly hammered that it ages the book, you know, like that it dates the book. And what I thought was funny was the way that one of the characters talks about branding. And although I know that was a word we were using as a verb 10 years ago, it's still progressed way beyond that. So that almost feels like futuristic, that, you know, when you look at a 10-year-old book and you're like, wow, he's talking about branding. That's, you know, far-sighted. That's great.
Yeah.
But so the first story is about this pig character and sort of this weird drug connection to everything. And there's a character in that who has the doll face like sewn or attached or whatever to her. She and her father was part of this drugs trade and also this human trafficking thing that was going on. And when shit goes down and Batman busts them, the father is like, we got to get out of town, and tries to escape with his daughter. But Pig shows up at his door, captures them both, puts the mask on the father. The father's like, you know, he turns into the Dollatron zombie. The girl Scarlet does not turn into that. Like, she's still aware of who she is, even though she has this horrible face, and she's very, conflicted and disturbed and everything by that. And the way that ties in, so that's sort of the first arc. And then the second arc is the return of the Red Hood, who is Jason Todd, who is, what was he? The second Robin, I guess. He was the second Robin after Dick Grayson left, and famously, hilariously killed. Not that the depiction of his murder was funny, but that character actually died because DC Comics ran like a 900 number to vote whether he should live or die.
Yeah.
And people, like, I think, sort of stacked it, sort of like when Jesse won that competition on MTV to become a VJ, and everybody knew that Dave should have won. But anyway, it was sort of stacked, and Jason had to be killed off in this Death in the Family arc, blah, blah, blah. I don't know anything about the Red Hood. When I Wikipedia'd it today to kind of figure this out, I guess Jason had been Red Hood before this book in a couple stories.
Okay.
He just sort of, like, they hadn't used him in a while. So it was sort of Grant Morrison that brought him back in to this character. Red Hood has decided, so the second arc of this is Red Hood has decided he will become sort of the anti-Batman and actually stop crime, because everyone knows, like, he knows Batman's dead. Not everyone does, but he knows the actual Batman's dead. So he wants to stop crime by actually killing criminals. And he enlists this girl that's been traumatized and disfigured as his sidekick, Scarlet. So that's where that weird back cover story about the new duo in town. So they are, they're sort of the not Bizarro in the funny way, but they are the Bizarro Batman and Robin. So you've got this new Batman and Robin, and you've got this like kind of sick twist on them that goes around actually killing criminals. And so that's where it transitioned into more of a typical Batman. Well, I don't know. The Pig story is kind of typical Batman too, but it once it included the larger DC universe, I guess, of Red Hood, that's where I was like, oh boy, because the Pig story. And man, that makes it sound like that's just where I wasn't as invested, because the Pig story showed how you can write like a horrible crime story without using Joker or relying on the rogues gallery. Like, and it was, even though it didn't get into the intricacies, the tie-ins to like human trafficking and the drug trade. And, I guess it came up because Pig had invented this drug that helped, sort of control people, make them docile and subservient. But then he realized like, oh, I don't need to just be selling this to the human traffickers. I can be the one at the top of the pyramid, and I can be the, one manufacturing this and selling it on the black market. So it had all those elements, and it felt like a real quest for them to stop him before if things got too terrible, whereas
is this a situation where volume 1 collects basically issues 1 through 4 were a very specific arc, and then issues 5 through 8 were a very different arc, and that's why it feels jarring?
Well, this is actually just 1 through 6, and it's all in volume 1.
Okay.
So I really think it is that Luke Cage, like, first season thing of, there's like a hard stop resolution to the Pig story before the Red Hood story comes in. So that's where you're like, oh, wow. It's not like Pig doesn't continue as a character. The events of those first 3 issues. They're
like, it's too gross. We got to stop it.
It certainly is like, and the reason I'm really not giving it I really don't want to try to like make it sound like I'm giving a negative review of the last 3 issues.
Oh, no.
But when I realized when I reread this that I remembered the first part of the arc and didn't remember the second part. And I think it's because of that, the Red Hood comes in and I'm like, oh, Red Hood, whatever. I just, but I didn't, I just didn't connect,
threat. Whatever, Red Hood. Hey, how you doing? How's it going?
Yeah. Cause he's,
you again?
It is an interesting like twist, and it's, the twist we've seen before, but it is an interesting, like, that mirror image of the Batman, with one exception, which is he will kill.
Oh, do you know who else that is the same exact kind of character is? The Wrath. Do you remember the Wrath?
No.
Go either now or after this episode's over. Go Google Batman the Wrath. It was another guy whose parents died that same night.
Oh my God!
What? Martha Wayne's parents died. He decided to become a vigilante too, but very much like this Red Hood situation, he kills. He's basically like Batman without any limits. A couple comics where he and the Batman meet up or they confront each other, and
now,
very
that would be so interesting, because I think what's missing is Dick Grayson just seems like a nicer person, and it would be interesting to see Bruce and Dick confront the Wrath as that, and then to see Bruce have an actual moment of self-reflection where he goes, oh Christ, I'm almost that guy.
Yeah. No.
That would be interesting to me, to like show Batman what a thug he is. But in this, it's just Dick going like, Jason, let's get you some help. Come on, dude. This is crazy. You know,
I love the idea of Dick Grayson as Batman.
Oh, it's amazing.
I've always loved the idea of Nightwing. So the fact that he is Batman and then that dynamic has changed, I'm right there with you. Like, I'm right there with Grant Morrison too, where like this seems like, you know, with 60 plus years of Batman, what else are you going to do? Right.
Yeah.
So you got to think of new, interesting ways to subvert it, like the White Knight, like Dark Knight Returns. Yeah. I don't want to say Strikes again, like Dark Knight Returns. And like this, it's like, how do we take, you know, how do we flip this on its head? Did Grant Morrison invent, I was going to say Damian Wayne. Did he? Is that his creation? I think it is. I think this was maybe not this book, but I think Grant Morrison created Damian Wayne. I believe. I
wouldn't doubt it, and I think that's what he was referencing in the epilogue or the DVD extras of that. I think what he meant was like by 2009, he had sort of written the whole origin of Damian and the scene. You know, it was like with Final Crisis and Bruce dying. This was sort of the way to proceed. You know.
Yeah.
But I remember at the time, it was such a breath of fresh air in the Batman canon, just like Stephanie Brown as Batgirl.
Yeah.
To reread it, I was very happy to see, like, I mean, of course, Quitely's art is going to stand the test of time no matter what, you know, but just also to see that story. And I think had it been a Joker story, and even though Red Hood was already in the Rogues Gallery, he wasn't like so well known that, you know, he'd been overused.
Yeah.
Penguin makes an appearance, but it's really like as a kind of a walk on. So these things, I think it stands up because of that, because it's not trying to put two new characters in the same old Batman story.
Yeah.
And there's a great mirror image there too, of, you know, when you think of like the dynamic duo facing off against two vigilantes, like having that bizarro pair that they're going against, and both of them are former Robins. You know, that's an interesting dynamic too.
And one Robin had a much better life than the other one.
Yeah,
you know, it's like Jason Todd's fate. I mean, that could have easily been Dick Grayson's fate had he been in the wrong place in the wrong time. So the fact that it was Jason Todd who, you know, by no fault of his own, had this happen to him, and it's like, you know, I can easily see some really juicy story stuff there too, where it's like, look, dude, you had everything handed to you. Yeah, your parents died, but like Bruce was a father to you, and this is my fate, and God damn it. Yeah, that's I like that juxtaposition. I'm gonna have to. I was already interested in reading this. This is the fact that it goes into that territory. I'm actually I think I'll enjoy the second half more than the first part.
Cool. Yeah, and I mean, of course, like the art stands up, and you know, it doesn't drop a beat in any way, like story wise or anything like that. I think it's merely that that my brain isn't used to, you know, you find the main bad guy and then he's defeated definitively in the first half of the book, and you're like, wait, what? But that's I would love to hear other people's take on this, because to me it works as a standalone, and when it gets to the end and there are hints of like what's to come, I found myself doing that thing of like, you know, flipping the page like, oh, where is, and then going like, oh no, of course that was just the end of it's done. That was the end of the volume.
Yeah.
So that's always good when you feel like, oh, this cliffhanger kind of makes me want to keep reading. But also feeling like I can shut this book and that's it. And, you know, I'm done. Yeah. I'm good.
Those are the best Batman stories where they're self-contained, and then there's not some greater mythos that you have to figure out.
Exactly.
That's why when you're trying to decide if this is part of the New 52 or not, like, it doesn't matter. I think the Batman stories that work, and strangely, this does not apply, in my opinion, to Superman. I feel like Superman has to have continuity. Batman doesn't. And I don't know why I feel that way. Maybe it's just the track record speaks for itself. I like these Batman stories where it's like, yeah, it can all fit together if you really want it to. Grant Morrison himself has a really interesting unified string theory of Batman that you can go look up at some point. But like, I like these little self-contained arcs or vignettes or whatever you want to refer to them as.
Yeah, I would definitely put it up there. It's hard for me to think of putting this on my shelf next to things like Hush and Long Halloween, but I don't know why that is. And I think it's just that like mental separation of Bruce and Dick. But, you know, but I story wise, I think it's just as good as those. So
one other thing I'll mention as a if you like this then that, Frank Quitely and Morrison did All-Star Superman like we talked about, but there's also a really cool collaboration in the Multiversity where Grant Morrison did a take on the Charlton Comics characters like they were the Watchmen, which is and quietly drew it, which is fascinating because it's the original idea of the Watchmen was DC had just acquired these Charlton characters like the Question and Blue Beetle and all this kind of stuff. And it's like, that was originally what Grant Morris, Jesus Christ, Alan Moore was gonna write with. And for some reason he and the team like went a different way, and they kind of, all the Watchmen characters are analogs of the Charlton characters in some way, shape or form. So it was really cool to see Grant Morrison go like, in his own words, he's like, when the Ruddles did the Beatles, this is what, I'm going to do that with these Charlton characters and give you sort of the Watchmen story. And Quietly's art really fits it incredibly well. So check that out too. If you dig cool. This matchup, that's kind of like a really deep cut that you might really dig too.
And speaking of deep cuts, you talked in depth about Multiversity in episode number 57. We were talking in our last episode about if you're new to this podcast, and that was just last year.
That's what blows my mind. It seems like we just talked about that.
Where to start if you're new to this podcast. And we talked about this in the last episode, but definitely whenever we mention old episodes, I like to quickly try to figure out what number that was in so you can dig back and find it. And where else can people find us, Taylor?
You can find us wherever you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, Pocket Casts, and all the rest. Search for Panelism, subscribe, and tell your friends. You can also find us on Instagram. We are panelism.inc, and that is also our website, www.panelism.ink, where you'll find all our past episodes and more. And check us out. Leave us a comment on Instagram. Send us an email, info@panelism.inc. And again, tell your friends. If you enjoy the show, share an episode or your favorite episode with your friends. Get them hooked on the show. Get them hooked on comics in general. It's a great, great time to be a comics reader or a graphic novel collector.
Absolutely.
In our cases, we're both.
Yeah. Well, until next time, I will see you then, or I will see you at another time.
It works enough.
It works enough. I feel like if we had a production company, that would be fantastic.
It works enough.